freely? That is enclosure. That's more like the photograph. As for myself, I must be Berger's idea of the photograph, for I find myself, like it or not, trying to stop time, always returning to the scene of the crime, or at least the image of the scene of the crime. To read Berger on drawing is quite surprising. It's amazing, as when he suggests that drawing, just like the candidate was saying, is like a conversation with the thing drawn, likely to involve prolonged and total immersion. And that's arresting to me, a conversation. To paragraph Berger on writing, it is a platitude that what's important in drawing is looking. A line drawn is important not for what it records, so much as what it leads you on to see. Quote, each confirmation or denial brings you closer to the object until finally, listen, get this in terms of mimetic magic, until finally you are, as it were, inside the object. The contours you have drawn no longer marking the edge of what you have seen, but the edge of what you have become. A drawing is an autobiographical record of one's discovery of an event, seen, remembered, or imagined. To me, the crucial and alarming thing here is the idea that the person drawing becomes what they are drawing. Berger puts it so well, so subtly. Quote, the edge of what you have become. I could pick a lot of quotes like this. Here's something from a drawer called Christopher Grubbs. By recording the scenes before me carefully, so carefully, I remember them more clearly. I become more deeply connected to things I draw and concerned about them. A richer life issues from this more intimate relationship with the visible world. Drawing breathes life into an idea. Well, these are very emotive, very metaphysical statements. Right? For Berger, and we don't stop there, for Berger, drawing is an activity much older than writing or architecture. It is, he says, as old as song. I find this stuff amazing. I don't know, you guys who go to art school and teach and stuff, maybe you're burnt out. Maybe you're suffering from
see, when I teach beginning painting or drawing, I always say, forget what it is that you're drawing. Like, don't name it. I'm not going to start drawing your notes. Forget it. Just you're looking at light and darkness. Because that's when you really become one. You know, if that's what you're aiming, you know, I don't really talk about it in those terms, but it's mostly about really allowing yourself to see. It's like listening, you know, when you're not stressed out, you listen better. You know, when you're writing, if you're so obsessed with writing, you're not going to write. You have to let go of the anxiety. You can't have anxiety. So if you're drawing, thinking about drawing, you're not going to be drawing.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I was going to make a comparison of the normality of the abnormal. For us, for me, drawing is the abnormal. For Berger, listen to this. Drawing is an activity much older than architecture or writing. It is as old as song. That inflection of what I call that inflection of language. Quote Berger, drawing is as fundamental to the energy which makes us human as singing and dancing. Which goes me back to Celine Sparrow. Tweet! And that this manuscript is full of that, much longer discussion of that Puring song and its relationship to the image. Drawing is as fundamental to the energy which makes us human as singing and dancing. Drawing, now get this, he adds, has something that painting, sculpture, videos, and installations lack, corporeality. So, I mean, my normal good deconstructionist and postmodern cynicism would freak out at this word, corporeality. But John Berger is so sensitive and sensible and famous. I included with a great deal of love and gratitude in this thing. So he's not afraid to make that move. At least whenever this was written in the 60s. I forget. Doesn't matter. And then there's this Derrida book, which my friend Stefan Pasha put me under, on drawings of the blind. He was asked by some museum in Paris to give a lecture, and the lecture became a book, as I guess is common with him. And he was fascinated by the place of hands in drawings of the blind. And he focuses most of the book on the hands, where the hands of the blind feature in all these paintings that are in this museum of drawings of blind people. These hands are like eyes. The hands of the blind are like eyes that are conversing with the immediate environment. For Derrida, this is to underline the importance of the hands, not only for the blind, because this is his move, but for the artist in the act of drawing. So we're getting to this corporeality thing. The parallel is disturbing, I say. For just as the blind are pictured with their agile hands stretched out in front of their body, these hands that are eyes, so the artist is using her or his hands as eyes too. And then Derrida goes on to make the same point as Berger, the whole body becomes eye. Well, that's pretty way out, set of linkages. So maybe that's where I wanted to, let me just see, 26, 29, let me should have a copy, or whatever. Drawing his father's face shortly after he died, John Burgess says he felt like a lifesaver, or I can't, anyway, he was saving a life. In this case, saving a likeness. You save a life, you're saving a likeness. But what sort of likeness? Quote, as I drew his mouth, his brows, his eyelids, as their specific forms emerged from the whiteness of the paper, I felt the history and the experience which made them as they were. And I conclude then at the end of these pages on drawings versus photographs, these exquisite, emotive, powerful statements by people who like drawing, like she's trying to get across what it is to be drawing. I conclude then, so because of all these possibilities, self-transformation, making an image come alive, dwelling within the image, drawing out history, e.g. the history of the father here, the portrait of the face, it seems to me obvious that a drawing in a fieldwork notebook has a lot to offer. Tony's a better drawer, right? But even a crude, stupid drawing is enough to provoke this sort of discussion. Even if I'm looking at someone else's drawing, not my own, I'm likely to feel like, this is my personal take, I feel, when I look at a drawing, I feel like I'm stretching out my hand. I mean, I don't do it, I don't have to stretch my hand out, but I somehow feel like I'm stretching out my hand to the thing pictured. Speaking for myself, I really have this feeling with a photograph. I don't know how you guys react there. And I end up by saying drawings are Dionysiac. Dionysus, the dancer, the ecstatic one, which takes us into all sorts of incredibly, I think, interesting discussions about Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, where you probably know he distinguishes between Apollo and Dionysus, and it's confusing, fabulously confusing for this dichotomy I'm setting up, because Dionysus is of the body, but not the image, whereas Apollo is of the image, held at arm's length, that you look at and you stand, you keep your body away from it. And so Nietzsche sets up these two sorts of possibilities for Greek drama. It contains these two poles, these two principles, the corporeal and the imageful. But I think what we have to do, and he does that too in all sorts of complicated ways, is see what sort of mix we are happy with or feel that is at work. But one thing that I really wanted to emphasize in all of this, of course, was the Dionysian aspect of this. And as an aside, I go on to say it's fascinating how in the West, dancing and drawing are such separate activities. There are dancers, there are people who dance, and there are people who draw. But what comes across to me reading and hearing about indigenous Australia, and we were looking at a movie just before class, is that drawing on the body, dancing body, and on the sand, both went hand in hand with dancing. And then just to make a funny point, my next sentence is hand in hand. So that's a verbal expression, but it sort of makes the point that even in language we have these expressions. I think we should maybe leave it there. Maybe bring it back to the beginning a little bit and then go. To draw, like you're saying, is to move my hand in keeping with what I'm drawing. And as the hand moves, so does the body, which tenses and keeps changing the angle of vision. This is an extraordinary act of bodily mimesis, it seems to me. It seems so obvious to me. I don't know why I haven't sort of thought about it before. And I suppose you could say it through thinking and reading, I don't know. That seems several stages removed. You observe keenly, very keenly, like never before. This is a new eye, like a hawk, etc., etc. What I think this all boils down to as regards the fieldwork notebook or diary is the making of a fetish. The fetish that is the construction, the guarding, the cherishing, the continuous elaboration, writing and drawing, that is the notebook itself. And maybe we can pick up on that later on, because at this point, sort of having gone through several layers of conversation about the drawing and fieldwork notebook, to the degree that we can make sense of the notion that a drawing like this is talismanic, which is what I want to explore in the second half after the coffee break. So the notebook has this quality as well. So as for the drawing, so for the book of which it is part. So that brings us back to the beginning, and let's talk about that possibility, or what such a statement might mean after a coffee. Okay? Years, it's unbelievable. Is sitting in a taxi in a town he doesn't know very well, Medellin, which is where two people, at least in this town, and I'm hanging out there for a week in 2006, and I think it was 2006, and the taxi goes, and I'm in a taxi, and it goes through this freeway. It's in this freeway, urban freeway, and there's huge concrete walls, 2 stories high. There's a tunnel, maybe 4 lanes of traffic, and it sees these people lying down where the concrete comes and joins the freeway. And there's a little, just a short width there. And the people lying down, 2 or 3 people lying down in what look like nylon bags, the sort of bags that are used by peasants to carry potatoes or corn that you load over donkeys. And boom, into the tunnel, which is completely dark. And I'm so sort of shocked, hard to describe why. What we'll do is tomorrow we'll have it projected on the wall or whatever, something like that. Today we'll just, we've got the black and white drawing in the text. Okay. But let's get together, you guys, you two and myself, and we'll certainly watch tomorrow. And sees this thing happens, the taxi goes into the tunnel, and despite having been in this country many, many, many times, I'm quite shaken up. And I mention that because a couple of Colombian kids in Canada said to me, well, surely you see stuff like this all the time, and a reviewer of the book said, this doesn't seem to me particularly horrible or appalling, but to me it was appalling. And when I asked the taxi driver, they said, why are they lying there? Sort of dumb question. And he just drives on and says, because it's warm, like they're on the edge of the tunnel. And that phrase kept reverberating in my mind, because when I first tried to think, the challenge to me was, I wrote down, I swear I saw this, and then days later, the timing I think is important, days later I did this drawing in watercolors. And that same trip, like a week later, I was at a place I've been to many times before on the Pacific coast of Colombia, which is mangrove swamps and rainforest, never stops raining. You just get used used to it. I mean, you just get used to rain. I mean, you walk out in the rain with practically no clothes on, and it's hot and it's rain and it's hot and it's rain. And these are the villages up these rivers with no roads, big mountains at the back, lots of strange things happening with guerrilla groups, mafias with cocaine now coming in, and these people are sort of like, whoa, what is happening here? My kids want to go and work with these white people who are planting coca because they can get $5 a day or something, but before that we got $1 a day, and we were brought here as slaves from Africa to wash gold in rivers, and all this stuff is coming down fast. So I could stay one night in that little village which you get up to by canoe because it was too dangerous. And so the same notebook contains this image, lots of things in between, and then sort of it ends with this description of being up in this village hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And this is important because I quickly developed an idea coming out of the drawing that I wanted to write about notebooks, and I wanted to write about fieldwork notebooks, and just think about their special properties as opposed to, say, books. And one of the things I wanted to do was have this sort of verisimilitude. I wanted to have something, it was as if the notebook became a book to be published, keeping somewhat like the same chronology. And that's why when you get to chapters 17 or 18, before the afterthoughts, that's where the book should end. So there's this rhythm or symmetry between the picture and then the river lying down in this bed, in this house by the river. And here's the tunnel and the freeway and the people lying in the blue cocoon, as I call it, blue bag. So the book, the manuscript in front of you, you've got part of it, follows, is sort of parallel to the book, is parallel to the notebook. And I didn't highlight that, but I tried to highlight it in what I call the afterthought. So the afterthought actually gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So we end at this is like chapter 17 or 18, and that should be the end of the thing. And then I couldn't resist writing these afterthoughts. And at first it was like 5 pages, and it was 7, and I think it's grown to like 20 pages or something ridiculous. And afterthoughts are important to me because we were talking about yesterday, I think, that when you keep notes in a notebook, especially if it's maybe only, well, not only, of course, that's ridiculous, but in a notebook, you have thoughts after the thoughts. They're triggered by the first thought, but they can be wild, they can be only loosely associated, and then there can be afterthoughts about afterthoughts, and they're often written at right angles and so on. An important point in all this stuff about notebooks is, to my mind, is that they're written by hand, and that allows for a lot of, you guys are pretty good at, you guys are wonderful, I'm sure, at putting layers upon layers of text. They have fancy names for this sort of thing, hypertext and all that sort of stuff. Well, I can do it by hand, but one thing you can't do with a computer, I don't think, or not so easily, is create diagrams and drawings with the same pen as you're working. One of the things that intrigued me a great deal about notebooks, looking back on them in my own case, and I've come across this with some other people as well, is that they become more you than you. Not to put too sharp a line on it, they become a fetish. You produce the book, but after a few days or weeks, and all the little drawings and all the little cutouts and stuff like that, all those phenomenally important telephone numbers or names and so forth, the book starts to become
more important than you even, and it's standing over you, and you hug it and you look after it very, very carefully. And if you're lonely, strange place, or tired and bored, boredom is a hugely important part of fieldwork, because you're meant to spend long periods of time in places where you don't like the climate, you don't like the food, you might not like some people, etc., etc. You're torn out of your milieu. Well, half the time when you're torn out of your milieu, that's great, because you're in that escape mode, right? The other half is shitty. So, welcome. You all know that. So this notebook becomes like, it's very strange. It's like an extension of your brain or your heart or some other part of your body. And I was very taken with this phenomenon of the strange quality of being that's in a notebook. And I felt like ivy on a stone wall or something, or plants in spring. That, you start off with just a little stem, and then as the weeks go by and so forth, these plants start to take on all sorts of different shapes and colours, and they grow everywhere, left, right, centre, and so forth. And that's what I started to think of this diary/notebook. It becomes festooned with afterthoughts. So adding this afterthought of 20 pages as sort of a neat trick, sort of device to copy a notebook, but this time in the form of a book. In the preface I say, I have a one-page preface, and I think it's really worth reading carefully. And it was very easy to write, and I think it's very, very succinct. And it basically says, this started off as an inquiry into drawings, and then I realised it was really only about one drawing for 120 pages, single stage, and notebooks. It became as much about notebooks as it did about drawing. So you're talking about the evolution of a problem, you're talking about the growth of an idea, or an inquiry. So the first inquiry was, it's really hard to know, isn't it? So fascinating in your own case. How do you grow something out of an idea? How does an idea grow? And when I look back, I can't remember at all. All I've got now is the result, but this is a highly polished, gone through how many versions? 10, 12 versions? This has got so little relationship to what the original little seed, right? In your own case, it has to be fascinating how the seed grows like that. I think the seed in the beginning was what gives you the drawing? How do you interpret a drawing? And how do you interpret this drawing in particular? So the first, I guess, 20 or 30 pages are dedicated to that issue. I say in the preface that I'm not much of a drawer. I'm trying to understand this pleasure or tendency to load a notebook up with drawings. I wanted to understand the tension and the relationships between drawings and words, drawings and text. This is a very age-old problem. And you saw a lot of it in last night's talk. The relationship between Arabic characters, Chinese pictograms, the whole incredibly complex discussions there are about alphabets and words and pictures. Think about the evolution in Western societies, European languages, between children's books and adult texts, the way the text works with a drawing in a child's book and gradually diminishes into a full-blown text. Think about the last, think of the invention of the movies, think of the invention now of YouTube and stuff like that, with images becoming fast and furious. This constant turmoil and tension between images and text. It's absolutely fascinating. It's confusing and as complex as all hell, and a lot of fun to get into. If I focus on the question of
first thing I have to say is that about this drawing is that, and I'd say it better now, I think, after I went through the tunnel, after I made a note saying, I swear I saw this in big letters, and that was obviously in another coloured pencil, that was obviously that I felt totally inadequate to the experience. So now we go back to that Benjaminian issues, you know, about experience changing with modernity. Well, modernity, right? Freeways, tunnels, people, derelict people by the side. I mean, you know, what could be more modern? And totally inadequate to this experience. So the first thing this guy does, that's me, easy to talk in the third person, is I swear I saw this in big letters, red font, and after that I made a drawing as if I still couldn't believe what I'd seen. And when I turned the pages of the notebook, this picture jumps out. And then I say, if I ask what grabs me and why this picture jumps out, my thoughts focus on the question, what is the difference between seeing and believing? You know, and that's a huge philosophical, fascinating issue. I can write, I swear I saw this as many times as I like, in red, green, yellow and blue pencil, but it won't be enough. The drawing is more than the result of seeing. It is seeing that doubts itself, and beyond that, doubts the world of man, because of the cruelty and the injustice that this scene represents, which is, of course, every day. You don't have to go to Colombia. It's all around you in New York. And then I go on here, and I've changed the wording here, but the general idea is fine. I very quickly say, is this what makes it a virtual talisman? And a talisman is an object or a drawing or a design, I guess, that one has to protect oneself against sort of the spiritual effluvium of bad atmosphere, bad people, bad spirits, and so forth. I would make that more sophisticated, but that's basically the idea. And I just throw it in there, because later on I actually took that up very seriously and had a whole chapter on starting to discuss something in great trepidation, because I think it has to be taken very seriously if you're going to say, is this partake of the sacred? You know, I think that's a very faltering step, that's a very serious step. Now I can remember something of the sea. I was teaching at my university, undergraduates who were aged about 20, and I wanted to talk about Roland Barthes' essay, The Third Meaning. And some devil got a hold of me, and I said, well, I'll show my own drawings. And I showed this drawing, this is the drawing by the tunnel. And I was scribbling away with my pencil, you know, on some paper before the class, and I thought, well, I wonder if I'll just go a bit further than I should, and say, well, is there something quote-unquote sacred about this drawing? And could we push Barthes, what he ever meant by the third meaning, in that direction? And that took me up to about page 40. But here I wanted to get it in fast, just an idea. Talking about Barthes, by the way, what I think is so interesting and is well expressed in this manuscript. The first 20, 30 pages of this, how do you analyze an image? I mean, the artists here, who individual artists especially, have their ways of doing that, and may or may not be vocal about it. That's the film people and the visual art people. The language people have their ways of trying to interpret texts, but I don't think they're very good or have much experience in interpreting a picture. So right there we've got this text-image thing like glaring at us problem. And what I thought was interesting about Barth's third meaning, or the way I work with it, is in answer to this absolutely, enormous question, how do you analyze an image? I mean, there's no answer to that, right? I mean, it's a question to provoke a discussion. What is an interpretation and so forth? What interested me so much in Barth's third meaning was on page 10 and 11, where I say, Barth was a restless thinker. No sooner did he got that semiotic click, everything was put into a grid or a framework, semiotics. Semiotics, I think the appeal for semiotics to so many people was precisely the worst features of structuralism. And post-structuralism or postmodernism is so obviously a 180-degree turn away from it, a reaction against the rigidity of Levi-Straussian, say, structuralism, where A is to B, is C is to D. Oh, I feel so much better. Order is being put into the world. I'm now master of explanation. I'm now master of the universe, and that sort of thing. Postmodernism is this more like this cringing, cunning, circuitous. I'm just a little mole weaving my way through the underbrush. You'll never catch me. That's me. That's my idea of the nervous system, and so forth. The nervous system is not out there, the nervous system is there and here, and you have to react as part of it. So Barth was a restless thinker. No sooner had he gotten things squared away with his semiotic theory that he found exceptions to the theory, because the very act, according to me, of squaring things self-destructs. So what follows is an elaboration of that idea that squaring things self-destructs. What is called theory gives you insight, but it does so at a cost. Blindness and insight, right? Insight is at the expense of blindness. Blindness has an advantage of insight. It does so at the expense of closing off things as well. Theory can never do justice to the contingent, the concrete, or the particular. And I think that's how I started off this course, really, saying, theory is great, important, we love it, but it can never explain anything that's close to you or particular, which is really why you started to get interested in theory in the first place. So you can enter into this crazy, endless loop, A simple way of expressing it would be you go from the particular to the general back to the particular. But what happens with theory jobs and so much in philosophy, it seems to me, is you never actually get back to anything concrete. And this is what, especially if you're working as an anthropologist with fieldwork, you can never forget people and events and situations and scratch your head and so on and so forth. Although plenty of anthropologists end up writing very abstract texts. The contingent is very important. The contingent. So you've got theory on the one side and contingency and the concrete and the particular on the other. Now we're not going to be mad about separation, but I wanted to separate them conceptually. Eventually we like to bring things all back into the one bathtub. But the contingent is very important in this manuscript, because one of the things that's so fascinating to me about Burroughs' scrapbooks, Burroughs and Geison's scrapbooks, and what's so fascinating to me about a notebook, or the potential of a notebook, is that it can be, I say it on the second paragraph of the preface, why not look at notebooks, anthropological fieldwork notebooks, as potentially, only potentially, works of modernist art? And that's the big step. In other words, could you sort of see a Burroughs-type scrapbook way in the background, using your imagination like crazy, looking at, say, one of my textbooks, notebooks. And so in that scrapbook notebook thing, as a modernist work of art, as opposed to a scientific record, the play of contingency and chance are very, very important. So I'm just using this moment, in my spiel here, to underscore the contingent. Let me just finish with this part piece of it. So here's the problem, continuing with this paragraph on page 10. If you don't exercise that theory muscle, I call it, which is a little nice phrase, because it immediately goes from the mind to the body. If you don't exercise your theory muscle,
to the extent you realise its limits, then you won't get to that cherished Zen-like moment of near ecstasy made out of the mastery of non-mastery. That knowing of not knowing that is of a piece with the effort, political as well as spiritual, to end the exploitation of nature and people. So I think that's one way of thinking what Robert Hart is getting to with this third meaning. Like you exhaust the theoretical possibilities that you've got, and there's something about the particular, the concrete and the contingent, which is escapes. And that's an overall approach I wanted to take to this question of, first off, which is, well, how do you talk about the image? How do you, what sort of art criticism do you like? And so, question.
I was just going to ask if you think theory and philosophy ultimately lead to abstraction, whether you see storytelling as not being an abstraction?
Definitely, yeah. I know these words are capable of ambiguities and ambivalences, but yeah, my gut tells me that they're very different communities of thinkers.
Like I feel like your own writing is very abstract. I mean, like a poetic abstraction rather than theoretical.
Well, that would fit into the Fictocriticism thing, right? Where you're trying to do both, or trying to do theory, but in a I don't know, concrete references or stories. It's interesting what you say. I think you're probably right. But this is a big discussion. What is concrete, what is abstract?
I don't know much about anthropology, so I guess I don't have any conception of what you're talking about very theoretical anthropology and how that would unpack things.
Know people. A guy I know who spent some time in the Amazon, Hugh Jones, one of those English names, Stephen Hugh Jones, and he gave his mother his book once he finished the book. And she read it, and she went up to him and said, well, it's a great book and everything, you know, insofar as I understood it, but what's it like to live there? You know it when you see it. Very few people do that. That sort of thing. Someone else said a...
Well, yeah, I was going to say, in regards to your question, and also in regards to all of the references to Freud in this, his first 30 pages we read, I think in Studies of Hysteria, Freud talks about this, discovery psychoanalysis, and he explains it in terms of getting rid of the image which he associates with pathology by turning it into words. So he's concerned with getting rid of this pathological image. I think what's important in what you're doing here also is that it's about enhancing it, or about the image has to remain.
That's so helpful. That's so helpful. Yeah. You know, I'd forgotten about the image part of that. I'll have to go back and look. Are you sure about that?
I'm sure. I think it's in Studies in Hysteria, but I can find out.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, let me
This is
know.
early
Yeah,
work,
yeah.
and he talks about pictures, about images, and getting rid of these images.
Yeah. No, I didn't think I mentioned Freud much. I'm not a crazy Freud.
Maybe a couple of times, and I focused on that.
But I was interested in a short thing that Freud wrote when he was pretty old, maybe early 1920s. It's called The Mystic Writing Pad, which is a fantastic piece, a page and a half, 2 pages, where he talks about this toy that people have. I had one when I was about 8, not that I go back to the 20s. But when you write on some cellophane thing, and I am crazy, Michael Taussig, and then you lift off the cellophane and it disappears. And there's a sort of a slate underneath. There's a faint impression of the words that stays on the part underneath. And I was saying, writing a diary to me is like the mystic writing pad, and I write and the reality disappears. And I was very interested in that aspect. But who's read Studies in Hysteria, or one of the case studies, apart from Hansen? Just a couple. You guys are like the mystic writing pad, these little hands.
The other version of that was the Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah, but you guys can't.
No, that's... No, The writing pad is better, I
And then you do
agree.
this Misty
That's
Glass.
just, that's hard to use.
Well, there was this famous patient called Anna O, who ended up being an absolutely astounding person, and she had the most complicated set of ailments when she was about 21, and Dr. Breuer, who was a big-time neurophysician, and this young C.B. Freud, you know, who's sort of halfway between the neurophysical world and the other world that he's going to slowly make, but he hasn't got to it yet. The study of the soul. Soul? I'm not sure. He's going to make it into neuropsychology, neurophysician as well, and Breuer sort of got him in tow, and so on. And Anna O is just the most remarkable person, most remarkable patient, and Breuer writes it up. And so the most famous case, really, in psychoanalysis, I would say, is written by a guy who's very into the physical world. And Sigmund Freud wrote the other 6 case studies. They're all about women, they're all upper-class women, and it's all about 1880s. And she teaches those 2 guys, really, how to proceed. And one of her techniques is what she calls chimney sweeping. And she says that if she can tell a story, any story, all her symptoms will go away for 24 hours. And then the stories tend to become more about herself. And that's where Freud comes up with this idea that, looking at the case studies, Breuer wrote it up, that hysteria is suffering from memories. And memories that haven't, the simplistic Freudian idea, and Freud went on to elaborate this in great complexity, that you're in a certain situation, the trauma, and you can't, it's repressed, you can't speak about it, but you can't let it out. And so instead of being a memory, it will be a distorted body. You know, you might cough all the time, you might have a nervous tic, you might have a paralysis, and they went further, they tried to sort of coordinate the paralysis or the body distortion symbolically, poetically, with the original trauma. That's all a bit far-fetched, but it's an incredibly interesting piece of writing, the case of Anna O, and it's like so foundational. But sure, she must have had pictures. Here we go back again, what is a picture in the mind? Is it like this picture that I'm drawing here? I don't know. But to continue this thread here, so the next thing there's this immediate mention of the talismanic property, which is then dropped to be picked up much later on. And I act impressionistically. I don't know how you guys talk about a painting, and here my TA, would be a great informant, a great source, because people like her are paid to tell people about the pictures that they're painting, and they have critiques, and then you move from one picture or one person to the next. So there must be this sort of, there's ways of going about this. I'm just reading a non-artist, William Burroughs, talking about his artist friend. I don't think I brought the text with me, no. Dyson. And I found it very refreshing the way he talked about Dyson's paintings. And it really brought home to me how many different ways there are of talking about a painting, what it means to you, and what it's related, how you relate it. And if you look at a catalogue, go to any art show and look at the catalogue and see how their essays are working and what they pick up on and so forth. They're generally unreadable because they're very, very, very into high theory junk. But occasionally you'll get someone you can follow. Because they usually get second-rate people who are very pretentious, and it's all about, Lacan or something. They get paid their $2,000, $3,000 for the, 5 pages, right?
It's just like, I didn't read that.
They get paid a lot better than they do writing an academic article, which is nothing.
That's true.
Anyway, to me it's just such an open book, how to write about a picture. So I started off then with these sort of impressions, and they kept coming back to, I don't know, 2 or 3, very small number
of motifs. One was the mixture of calm with desperation, that in the picture, and of course you're talking, it's one thing to interpret a picture or try, it's another thing to draw a picture. So this is sort of an interesting case, even though the artist is pathetically beyond words. But that is sort of fascinating, to get the painter or the drawer to try and interpret their own drawing, or put the two modalities apart. It's one thing to look at a painting, it's another thing to make it. And they are separate worlds, and sometimes they coalesce. So that's an interesting complication in this case. So I was interested in contrasts, I guess, when I tried to think about a mix of calm and desperation, of movement and incredible stasis, of a frozen quality, a still life quality. Nature morte is what the French say, which is like so much more graphic than in English, which is still life. This is like dead nature. This is like a state of emergency where it's like, that's how I see it, that the tradition of depressed teachers is that the state of emergency in which we live is not the exception but the rule. Therefore, you have to find a way of using that energy, if you like, to fix things up in terms of cosmic justice. There's a stillness, it seems to me, in the situation and the picture, which is about to explode. And that's sort of like a state of emergency. That's how I envisage the state of emergency. There's a stillness, there's a static quality to it, and the tension in there, the repression, the force that's being used to maintain the situation is likely to lead to its undoing in a maybe very rapid and violent way. Maybe like the undoing of the Soviet Union or something like that, of that order, that speed. Unbelievable. Sometimes this happens in history. Whether it was for good or for bad is another issue. But it's certainly part of the revolutionary hagiography, revolutionary ideology, which probably not many people today share, but they sure did in the 19th century. They sure did here in Switzerland in the Jura Mountains with the actress behind Bakunin. They sure did when they were digging up the cobblestones in Paris in 1848 and 1871. They sure did in 1968. And that's part of, I guess, Hakim-Bey's temporary autonomous zone type of thing. So it's the calm and the violence, the stillness and the potential for movement. A third and related feature might be enclosure. And this was pointed out to me by someone else, and I've been thinking about it a lot. This reviewer, Chris Spracken, I've never met him. He kept seeing that as a motif through the whole manuscript. So you've got one of the things that's made a lot of in the picture and in the description of the picture is this sort of thing. Something like that. And here are the tiles. This sense of enclosure is focused on a lot. And I realised later on that it's a sort of double, triple movement of enclosure, because there's this person, if it is a person, there's this man, if it is a man. It's very important, this uncertainty and the speed with which this is happening.
being sewn into the bag, that's how it's seen by a woman, if it is a woman. So the man is being enclosed, the tunnel is here, there are these huge concrete walls, there's a pencil mark here for some reason, and there's something in her hand in the drawing. And it's as if not only is he enclosed, but she is enclosed. She is enclosing herself. So there's enclosed, but there's enclosing. There's the stitcher, as I saw it, and the stitcher is stitching herself in as well. So there's different levels of enclosure and enclosing. Is it valid? I don't know. To enlarge upon that word, enclosure, and wonder if it doesn't apply to many aspects of life, of one's life, of the author, of the situation. And I had this image that I'd heard of years ago stuck in my, not an image, I mean, the word image is very, you can use it for a picture, I guess you can use it for something much more diffuse or general. Someone had told me they went to the funeral of two people who'd been assassinated in their bedroom, two sociologists who worked for a Jesuit organization called SINEP, and which kept statistics on assassinations and horrible things in Colombia. They were the only source for a long time. These two sociologists were murdered at night. Their kid escaped by hiding in the closet. And he got up and spoke at the funeral, not at the funeral, at the memorial. And someone, I wasn't there, but someone reported to me and said, I want to live in a closet. You know, well, you hear things and they stick at the back of your mind and suddenly they come out again. And that's really what we're talking about all the time, I think, how unexpectedly they come back. So this notion, I want to live in a closet, a 8 or 9-year-old kid. And I kept thinking, well, don't we all? Not to make cheap of this kid's experience, but so on the one hand you look at this as what could be more horrible, and on the other hand you think, well, there's something comforting about enclosure too. So to be enclosed like that is like to be trapped, terribly trapped, but an enclosure can also be protection in a cruel world. So it's that double property that I thought is probably very important in this picture. And so they were the three main, or 3 or 4 main motifs or tropes or something that I was thinking about. And the enclosure, this sense of can be expanded poetically, right? This is like the eye of the hurricane. You often wonder what it's. The eye of a hurricane is supposed to be really calm, and it's a very scary thought, right? Because what's going on with the bloody hurricane, and how long will the eye stay in one place? And isn't it weird to think about calm in the midst of this huge storm? And there's that. So you're getting the sense of the conflict, the dichotomy, the movement and violence of that. And then, of course, you expand the metaphor out and you think about the rest of, say, this country or Latin America, or you can go into the world as a whole. Probably it's too alarmingly general, but so there's several pages which talk about why you might find homeless people sleeping in such an unbelievable situation in Colombia. And so there's 3 million displaced people due to such and such and such and such. And all seems to coincide with Medellin. So you sort of stack the thing up and sort of say, well, it's really not a surprise that, as we put it, poetically, symbolically, mythically, of course there are people all over, but there's something, there's something politically, poetically correct that you would find it in that city. And the reasons are given with statistics and everything, and we won't go into that. But so what I'm trying to do is say, how do you look at a picture? What sort of things? This is a particular way of looking at a picture. So that seems to me incredibly important.
Once there was a forest, now there is a plastic bag. That's a phrase that's used in those pages. Once there was a forest where people like that might have lived, or the history of the state of Antioquia, or the history of Latin America. Once there was a forest, now there is a plastic bag. I mean, that's something to contend with. And the silly little picture can generate such striking, if simple, contrasts. The description becomes allegorical, is another way of putting it. We move from a diagrammatic sort of drawing to allegory pretty fast. And of course, you've got to think that the way you and I look at things anyway is always going to have many allegorical layers to it. I mean, we don't have time, or we can't be bothered, to make them conscious or elaborate them. So it's sort of interesting to just slow down a bit, try and pick on one picture and pick out like this.
I think that's a strange kind of tenderness.
Why do you think it's strange? Nina, maybe speak a little bit louder.
Yeah.
Tenderness or tenderness?
Sorry, I missed it.
It's a kind of tenderness in this.
Oh, I see. I thought it was strangeness.
No, tenderness.
The forest there?
No, between the two people.
Oh yeah, I feel that very much.
Yeah.
So maybe I should talk about that. Yeah, no, definitely I feel that. Straight off.
So, yeah.
I assumed that. Maybe because I assumed it. I didn't,
But that's the thing, when you drew this, right? You were in your head in a different way, and when we look at it, we're in our heads in a different way. So, like when I looked at that, I didn't think body bag. I didn't know what that was. I thought it was a little boat, and there was this water under there, and it's sort of flowing upstream, and then going downstream. And I'm like, what am I looking at? And then I thought, well, maybe that girl, that's a woman in there, like sort of drawing herself. Like so it goes back to the author, right? Because it's not. I don't think of it as sewing. I think of it like she's holding a pencil, and she's drawing. She's sort of pointing to how this whole thing's put together. Like, I drew myself within myself and outside of myself, right? So it's a spiral, sort of. Because that's where your eye goes first. It's the center point.
It's crazy because even though I don't know which is the tunnel that you're talking about, I know this. I think I know the tunnel where you saw this. I think I've seen this, and I think I did crossing the tunnel inside the car.
yeah.
So I think this is another possible thing. I mean, for me, it talks in a very weird way, but I can see it and I can relate to the physical space.
Well, it sounds exaggerated what I'm saying, for instance, to a local. Not at all. Because I would think if someone came to where I live, and I spent a week in Medellin, they could see the most amazing things that I don't see because I live in the place. I'm totally blunted. My sensibilities are blunted. But some stranger comes to where I live, and they could come up with the most amazing images and stories and so forth. Like some of those images you may have of Susfay, if you lived here for 4 years and you went, when you were very busy, you had such a different take on it. By the way, but that's what I thought you were getting at. That this was like blown out of all proportion.
No, and I can tell you that you've seen one part of it that is real. There are many more things there that I've seen. I mean, it doesn't mean that one is blown or the other one is not blown. It's this kind of multiplicity of things in that same space.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would never try to say that because you're coming from abroad, you won't have the, it's not possible for me to tell that. No, of course not. And actually, everything that you have said about Colombia for me is something that should be read in Spanish by us Colombians. This I think is very valuable.
I couldn't, it's very hard to read, one sees so much and hears so much, it's very, very hard to know, to filter out and just pick on the right detail to make a document like this, because this is a document that's meant to be a work of art, as well as a scientific statement. And what you choose and how you link them together, can take like the preface was written in about 10 minutes, and then 2 or 3 pages after it may take months, you know, and rewriting and rewriting. You're not stewing on one page for months, heavens no. But many, many, many drafts. So some things just work out real fast, other things do not. But I remember talking to this very dark-skinned guy from Equatorial Guinea. He had one eye, and he was known as a poet in Kali. And I'd heard such bad things about Equatorial Guinea. Like, this is a bad place. You know, this is the quintessential dictatorship. You know, and I asked him what it's like there. How do people? What happens to people's minds when you live, you know, 24/7, every week, every day, every year in such a place? And he said, well, and then he says, well, look around you here. And then, you know, he elaborated a few moments, but that was like really caught me, that the way he took the normality of this situation in Colombia and took my question in that direction. But what I'm trying to get at is a big motif that develops later on in talking about this is the normality of the abnormal. And this was something I wanted to focus on a lot, because my first reaction to this for a long time, for a couple of years, was to treat this in terms of shock and trauma. Feeling a little bit awkward about putting it that way, but saying, well, this is a response to a shocking situation, the artist is shocked and all that sort of stuff. And then as I thought about it more and more, and I'll try and get through some of the layers today, it seemed to me that what's really shocking is how unshocking it is, if you see where I'm getting with this. So then I had to start to think about the abnormal, well, you know, it doesn't matter where you start, the normality of the abnormal, or the abnormality of the normal. And that's what I started to focus on. And towards the end, chapter 16 or whatever it might be, that gets more and more developed that way. It was too easy to put it into the box of shock, I thought. But I'll spend a few, when the taxi driver says because it's warm in there, that's what I took later on as my motif, as my evidence of the normality of the abnormal. When the taxi driver answers in this terribly pragmatic, practical way to my question, sort of my dumb question, why do people sleep in the tunnel or on the edge of the tunnel? And he says, because it's warm in there. It's full of gasoline fumes, it's totally dark, there's 4 lanes of traffic going like this. And for someone to say they sleep in there because it's warm in there strikes you as like the weirdest thing you've ever heard in your life. And he says it in a totally matter-of-fact way. And you know, and you can surely know, I didn't grow up like this, so maybe I'm more naive, that this situation is worldwide, that these terrible things are occurring all the time, and you get used to it so quickly. You get used to poverty, other people's poverty, injustice. You get very, very quickly used to it, like within 3 days, 3 months, I don't know what it might be. So the whole attempt finally was to sort of think about that. And my understanding since a long time is that this normality of the abnormal, I'll put it up here to sort of emblematize it. It's a sort of schizo situation, or double situation, or highly ambivalent situation in which on the surface, people are totally numbed out or accept the normality of the abnormal. All the street kids who are sniffing glue and gasoline and child prostitution and the debris and the rats and the this and the that and the this and the that, and then the stories of injustice and violence around that, and so on and so forth. This apparent acceptance on your part as an outsider from the middle class, whatever, and of the people involved, that's one. But second, such a situation can violently be ruptured. Suddenly you freak out, and then it closes over again. So you see something that sort of breaks your acceptance, that breaks the calm, or whatever term I could use, and then you go back to the first position again. And that's what I wanted to emphasize in the in this discussion and points of redemption.
But sorry, I'm not sure if we can use the term normality.
Sorry?
I'm not sure. Like, I'm uncomfortable to hear the term normality in this context, because I'm not sure people who are living there still see it as a normal situation.
I completely agree with you. Unless he says the word temporal normality, then
No,
I
I
can expect
still don't
a
see
little
the
bit more.
normality.
Yeah, but I expect a little bit more because normality for me is also putting out.
Well, I was trying to stress that it's a normality in commas.
Yeah.
It's a sort of, your mind goes elsewhere, consciousness goes elsewhere. It's sort of normal, sort of accepted, and then it can be displaced very violently and ruptured. I know exactly what you're coming at, and you're not the first person to say that.
Well, it's kind of like living in a city, actually. It's kind of like living in the city.
So you can go there.
It's kind of like living in the city. You walk in the metro, you see all sorts of things, you know, I mean, like this, and you just walk past it. It's normal.
Yeah, I mean, when I tried to get across, here comes the abstractions, Freud and Benjamin's notion of shock and trauma, and in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, the notion of the thumb callus on consciousness, you could apply to sensibility. You develop a callus, but things can break through it, and then there's this terrible fall, and then ordinary life goes on again. So it's normal in calmness. I grew up in a very peaceful, calm place where indigenous people didn't exist for the first 10 years of my life. I didn't know anything about it in Australia. You know, I was born in the 40s. Burgeoning economy, incredible calm, like Canada is something, you know, one of these, Sweden or something, you know. And then, you know, just going to England was an eye-opening experience for me. Imagine going to this sort of situation. So a lot of what I say is like this little innocent brat, you know, who's exposed to this sort of stuff. I then wanted to take up the issue of drawing itself, drawing in relationship to writing, drawing in relationship to photography. And I mixed this up with the general question was why put a drawing in and not just write. But that quickly became a question, what's the difference between drawing and photography? And you guys need to talk and think about this a lot. But I was fascinated by 2 or 3 aspects of all of that. I had come across something in the Times where the heads of Maori people were in a museum in a place called Rouen, R-O-U-E-N, and the museum director, this is an article about 2 years ago, wants to ship these heads back to New Zealand, and the Minister of Culture says that they can't be shipped back because they're works of art or something like that, I forget what it is. And the minister, the mayor of Rouen said, you know, this is colonial, horrible colonial stuff, we've got to send it back and so forth. When you dig into the story of it, you find there's this heavy trade for these heads in the 19th century, and people apparently would pay a lot of money for these heavily tattooed heads. And that the chiefs, Maori chiefs, would be into decapitating and selling these heads, and the story got more and more complicated. But from my point of view, what was stuck in my head above all else was that the people in the Rouens would not allow anybody to photograph these heads, but they could draw them. And I had a picture of the drawing. These heads are all over the place. days. The American Museum of Natural History has a bunch and so on and so forth. So I raised the question, why can't you have a photograph, but a drawing is okay? And I have no good answer to that. I don't know if you have. I was also interested why photographs are not allowed in many courts of law, England and the US and so forth. These are provocations, these questions. I don't think there's any good answer. My friend Tom, who's an expert on these sorts of things, Tom Mitchell, who's written a ton of books about picture theory and so forth, University of Chicago, he just says straight off, because the photograph's magical. The photograph is seen as having a mimetic relationship to that which it is a picture of. But my equally brilliant friend Larry Lessig, who was a clerk in the Supreme Court, now is a big-time professor at Harvard Law, he says, because you can't have cameras in the court because it distracts the proceedings. Well, I would think today with, very sensitive film and no flash and no shutter click and so forth. I don't know if you have any insight into these questions of why drawings and not photographs.
Has that always been a law?
Sorry?
Has that always been a law or a rule that you can't have photographs in the courtroom?
In some jurisdictions, yeah.
You can't have any
cameras.
You can't have any recording equipment in federal court in the United States.
Sometimes
But
it's a
you can
decision
without
of the
permission
judge.
of the judge.
The judge,
But many states allow videos and cameras.
What's the implication? I think so, for a very long period of time anyway, if not since always. But even if it's new, which it's not, you still have the same problem. Why can you sit there and draw? You look up in the internet and you see lots and lots of courtroom artists have got their stuff for sale. By the way.
Yeah, I actually, my interpretation was that because drawing is so much more subjective, that there's always room for argument if you find something questionable within it. So, for instance, in photography, you have actually the light rays from that object making an imprint, and so it's more official. So that was my, what I thought would be the case, and so that's why I was kind of surprised by the sentence at the end of the last sentence on page 16, where you say that what's for sure is that drawing intervenes in the reckoning of reality in ways that writing and photography do not. And I would have actually put writing and drawing together as opposed to photography, because writing also has this subjective element where it's filtered through the creator's imagination before being documented.
Well, I agree with that. Someone else had a comment?
I was going to say the same.
Same
Well,
thing?
I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but like the Maya believe that it steals your soul, right? So if there's that essence, I don't know about contemporary.
In drawing, you mean? In representation?
No, photographing, you can't photograph. However, you can now pay them, because I did it, to videotape. So, but there is this line. It takes a part of your essence. It's a photo image of you. It is magical.
That was the Tom Mitchell response.
Yeah.
Yeah, but why? The next question would be, why the court, which is supposed to be super rational.
Yeah, that I don't
The
know.
court can't prohibit on grounds of magic. It's got to do. And that's why Larry Lessig said, it was like throw the judge off or the jury off and so forth, as opposed to some,
The person that's doing that.
Sitting quietly in the corner with a sketch pad doing these amazing drawings, 5 minutes, grabs likeness. There are all sorts of issues here. Like, I had a lot of fun thinking about the Wall Street Journal, especially as it used to be, with all those cute little drawings they have the size of postage stamps. They're usually of some rich guy smiling. Check out the Wall Street Journal next time, and you can see this displacement of photography by drawings. And this is really for the worst people, this newspaper. And think about try and think about the relationship of drawing to photography in the Wall Street Journal, and then you'll turn the page 4, and there'll be this huge photograph in colour to sell Xerox machine or Nikon or something, you know. So it's all very peculiar. You could, you know, do great semester term paper to actually go study drawing photography in the Wall Street Journal. It can go on and on this discussion, but it's mainly just to encourage thinking about the relationship between writing and drawing. And I wanted to get on to, I'll take the questions in a minute, I wanted to get on to certain ideologies of drawing, and I guess I'll pick on 2 or 3, and one of them is writing is so much more important than drawing in Western civilization, or at least modern Western civilization. Drawing is something that little children do, and when they're about 4 or 5, they're sort of pushed more and more towards reading and writing, and then the drawing, the interest, the encouragement to draw is it's actually almost prohibited. It's certainly like close to 0, and this, why that should be, and so forth, you know, is, I guess, well, it fits in with the importance of writing and reading in this economy, in this society. And a select tiny group of people are allowed to go on and draw and paint, and then that enters into a really rich, really economically rich world of modern art, and art making and so forth. I mean, all those students, a tiny fraction, will go on to make a huge amount of money, but that's not really what's so important to me at this point. Is art is a huge market, incredibly large market, but that's just a tiny minority, and despite that, it's in a way makes my point. You think more kids would be encouraged to go into art if you can make so much money out of it, even if it's only a tiny proportion of kids that would ever get there, less than 1%. So I was fascinated by ideologies which discourage drawing after a certain age. Another thing, quite different, that interests me a great deal is the ideologies of drawing. And there I have John Berger, of all people. Do you know his work at all?
Mm-hmm.
The artists probably do. John Berger, he's got a string of books, and some of his books are very much photos and text. Another Way of Seeing, Pig Earth, A Seventh Man. These are photographs and text. Photograph is very telegraphic text. So this is a guy who's very, very into photography and writing. And it turns out that he loves drawing, of all things. I had no idea. And not only was that interesting to me, that this writer, photograph person was so involved with drawing and so like religiously involved with it, but what he had to say about it was so fascinating. 24 and 25. So on top of page 24, I say photography, we talk about taking the photograph, and yet we talk about making a drawing. And that is so coarse, so violent, and so accurate. I mean, you've got to look at ordinary language usage, you know, sometimes. And it is freaky, you know, I'm going to take a photograph, I'm going to shoot a photo, and on the other hand, I'm going to make a drawing. And although I say there's much to quibble about with these words, there is wisdom in them too. John Burgess thinks so, with his enigmatic notion that a photograph stops time while a drawing encompasses it. Now, I'm not quite certain what those terms might mean, stops time versus encompassing, but they do suggest to me a very different type of relationship. You got something to say on that?
Well, yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, because drawing, you know, you're using your hands and you're not really thinking of time, right? You're just trying to get it right. You're trying to get it right. And so as you keep trying to get it right, it's over and over again. So you kind of lose yourself in it, and you're losing yourself in time. So there's no measure, you know, the measures are, you don't think of it like that. And in a photo, when you take a picture, you know, click, But I guess the hardest part with taking pictures is deciding what you're gonna frame, right? And then put it here, and put it here. So, and it's an instant, boom, it's taken.
So I was thinking encompass, so that he emphasized drawing encompasses time, and I go on with this sort of bullshit. Encompass, like enclose, and we back to the drawing. Encompass, but encompass sounds more capacious, more generous than enclosure. More of a two-way movement, like she's saying. Like what the woman was doing to the man, sewing him into the nylon bag.